The red taillights of the Mercedes didn't just fade. They vanished, swallowed whole by the white void of the Montana blizzard. Samantha stood shivering on the side of Interstate 90, her hands clutching her swollen belly, the wind screaming like a banshee in her ears. She wasn't just abandoned, she was being erased. At 8 months pregnant, with the temperature dropping to 10 below zero, the man who had vowed to protect her had just sentenced her to death for the crime of being an inconvenience. But fate has a strange way of balancing the scales. Brad thought he was leaving behind a burden. He didn't know he was leaving his wife in the path of a man who could buy and sell his entire existence 10 times over. The argument had started 50 miles back, somewhere near the border of Idaho and Montana, but the silence that followed was far more violent. Inside the plush leather interior of the 2024 Mercedes-Benz GLS, the climate control was set to a perfect 72 degrees, but Samantha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Brad sat in the driver's seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He was a handsome man, with the kind of sharp, symmetrical jawline that looked good on magazine covers for sterling architectures, his boutique firm in Seattle. But right now, his face was twisted into a sneer of pure irritation. "I told you not to come," Brad muttered, his eyes fixed on the swirling snow that was beginning to accumulate on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. "This is a business retreat, Samantha. High-level networking. Not a baby moon." Samantha shifted uncomfortably. The seatbelt was digging into her lower abdomen. At 34 weeks pregnant, everything was uncomfortable. Dr. Henderson said I shouldn't be alone this close to the date. Besides, you said it was at a lodge. I would just stay in the room while you worked. "And look at you," Brad snapped, glancing over at her oversized gray sweater and swollen ankles. "You're a mess. How does it look for me? I'm trying to close a deal with the chaotic Vance Group. I need to look sharp, unencumbered. Instead, I'm dragging a waddling anchor around." Samantha felt tears prick her eyes, hot and stinging. "I'm your wife, Brad. Carrying your daughter." "You're a distraction," he shouted, hitting the steering wheel. The car swerved slightly as the tires lost traction on a patch of black ice. Brad corrected it violently, his temper flaring. He checked his Rolex. He was running late. Felicity Vance, the heiress to the Vance fortune, and the woman he had been secretly texting for the past 3 months, was waiting at the Big Sky Resort. He couldn't show up with Samantha. He just couldn't. A dark thought, one that had been festering in the back of his mind for weeks, suddenly took root. He looked at the GPS. They were on a desolate stretch of highway, surrounded by thick pine forests. The snow was a white curtain, hiding everything. He slowed the car down. "What are you doing?" Samantha asked, her voice trembling. "I can't do this," Brad said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I can't do this anymore." You, the baby, the constant neediness. It's suffocating me. He pulled the car onto the narrow shoulder. The hazard lights clicked on, a rhythmic tick-tock, tick-tock that sounded like a countdown. Brad, get out. Samantha stared at him. She couldn't process the words. What? Get out of the car, Samantha. No. He unlocked the doors. I'm done. I'm going to the lodge alone. You figure it out. Brad, it's a blizzard. It's 10 below zero. You can't be serious. Panic rose in her throat, tasting like bile. I'm pregnant. We will die out there. Brad reached across, opened her door and shoved her shoulder. There's a gas station about 5 miles back. Walk. Someone will pick you up. You're always playing the victim. I'm sure you'll find a savior. Brad, please. She grabbed his arm, but he shook her off with a look of utter disgust. Get out or I drag you out. The look in his eyes was a stranger's eyes, cold, dead, shark-like. Terrified, Samantha unbuckled. She grabbed her purse, but he snatched it from her. No, he said, tossing it into the back seat. That's my credit card in there. My phone plan. You leave with what you came with. He pushed her. She stumbled out into the biting wind, her boots sinking into 6 inches of fresh powder. The cold hit her like a physical blow, sucking the air from her lungs. Before she could even turn around, the passenger door slammed shut. The engine roared. The Mercedes kicked up a spray of snow and gravel, spraying her legs. Brad, she screamed, stumbling after the car. Brad, please. The baby. He didn't look back. The red taillights shrank into the distance, swallowed by the whiteout conditions. She was alone. Samantha stood there, the shock freezing her more effectively than the wind. She was wearing a wool coat that wouldn't close over her belly, leggings, and fashion boots not meant for hiking. She looked around. Forest. Snow. Darkness falling rapidly. She wrapped her arms around her stomach. I'm sorry, she whispered to the life inside her. I'm so sorry. She began to walk. Not back toward the gas station. She knew she couldn't make 5 miles in this storm, but forward, hoping for a miracle. The wind howled through the trees, sounding like wolves. Her toes went numb within minutes. Her eyelashes froze together. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The cold seeped into her bones, making her movements sluggish. She stumbled over a hidden root and fell hard onto her hands and knees. A sharp tearing pain ripped through her lower back. It wasn't the cold. It was deeper. She gasped, clutching her belly as the pain wrapped around her midsection like a tightening vice. Water gushed down her legs, warm and then instantly freezing. Her water had broken. The contraction hit her so hard she couldn't breathe. Samantha curled into a ball in the snowbank, the white powder staining red beneath her. She was going to die here. She knew it with a terrifying clarity. Brad had killed them both without pulling a trigger. "Help," she whimpered, but the wind snatched the word away. She tried to crawl toward the tree line, seeking some shelter from the biting wind, but her body refused to cooperate. Another contraction seized her, closer than the last. The baby was coming. No. She closed her eyes, thinking of the nursery she had painted yellow, the tiny onesies folded in the drawer. She thought of her mother, who had passed away 3 years ago. "Mom, are you coming to get me?" Through the haze of pain and hypothermia, she felt a vibration in the ground. A low rumble, deep and guttural. She forced her eyes open. In the distance, cutting through the swirling snow like lasers, were 2 beams of blinding light. They were high up, mounted on a massive grill. A truck. She tried to wave, but her arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She couldn't stand. She was just a dark lump on the side of the road, rapidly being covered by fresh snow. The truck was moving fast. He wouldn't see her. He would drive right past, or worse, the trailer would catch her in its draft and roll her into the ditch. "Oh, please," she prayed. "For her. Not for me." The massive rig, a charcoal grey Peterbilt 579 with custom chrome accents, thundered closer. The air horn blasted, a deep, mournful sound. The brakes hissed, a violent screech of compressed air and rubber fighting against ice. The truck didn't just slow down, it jackknifed slightly, the driver fighting for control to stop on the slick surface without crushing her. The beast of a machine came to a halt 50 feet past her. The driver's side door flew open. A figure jumped down. He didn't use the steps, he vaulted. He was huge, wearing a heavy canvas jacket and a dark beanie. He ran toward her, his boots crunching heavily in the snow. "Hey," he roared, his voice deep and commanding. "Can you hear me?" He reached her, dropping to his knees in the snow without hesitation. He grabbed her shoulders, turning her over. Samantha looked up into a face that was rough, unshaven, and etched with concern. He had piercing blue eyes that seemed to burn with an intensity that cut through the cold. "Help, baby," she managed to choke out. The man's eyes widened as he saw her swollen belly and the blood in the snow. "Oh God. Okay. Okay, I got you." He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask where her car was. He scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing, holding her tight against his chest to share his warmth. "Hang on," he said, his breath coming in white puffs. "My name is Colt. I'm going to get you warm." He ran back to the truck, carrying her up the steps and into the cab. It wasn't just a truck cab, it was immaculate. The heater was blasting, and it smelled of leather and coffee. He laid her down on the sleeper berth behind the seats. "We need to get you to a hospital," Colt said, scrambling into the driver's seat. No time, Samantha screamed as another contraction ripped through her. She's coming. Colt looked back, his face pale beneath the stubble. He saw the way her body arched. He knew she was right. He had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming. He knew the signs of birth, but he had never delivered a human baby. He killed the engine, but kept the heater running. He stripped off his heavy jacket and threw it over her, then grabbed a first aid kit and a clean towel from the overhead compartment. "Okay," Colt said, his voice dropping to a soothing rumble. He knelt beside the berth. "What's your name?" "Sam. Samantha." "Okay, Samantha. You and me. We're going to do this. I'm not leaving you. You hear me? You are safe." For the next hour, the cab of the Peterbilt became a battlefield and a sanctuary. Outside, the storm raged, burying the world in white. Inside, Samantha fought the hardest battle of her life. Colt was incredible. He was gentle but firm, guiding her, holding her hand when the pain was too much, wiping the sweat from her forehead with his sleeve. He didn't look at her with disgust or annoyance. He looked at her with pure, focused reverence. "Push, Sam. Come on, one more." With a final, guttural scream that tore from her throat, Samantha pushed. Silence filled the cab for a heartbeat, followed by a wet, gurgling cry. "She's here," Colt whispered, his voice cracking. He lifted the tiny, slippery infant. It was a girl. He quickly wrapped her in a clean flannel shirt he pulled from his bag, rubbing her back vigorously until she let out a loud, healthy wail. "She's crying," Colt laughed, a sound of pure relief. "She's got a set of lungs on her." He placed the baby on Samantha's chest. Samantha wept, clutching her daughter. "Hope," she whispered. "Her name is Hope." Colt sat back on his heels, wiping blood and fluid from his hands with a sanitizer wipe. He looked at the woman and the child. He felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct so fierce it surprised him. He reached for a bottle of water and held it to Samantha's lips. "Drink. We need to wait for the placenta, then I'm driving you to the nearest ER. I've got a satellite phone. I already called ahead to Bozeman Deaconess. They're ready for us." Samantha looked at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us." "Who are you?" Colt hesitated. He looked down at his rough hands, then at the logo on the steering wheel. To the world, he was just a trucker hauling steel. But in reality, Colton Maverick was the majority shareholder of Maverick Logistics, the very company whose logo was painted on the side of the trailer. He was on his annual undercover run, driving the routes to stay connected to his employees and the reality of the road. "Just a driver, ma'am," Colt said softly. "Just a guy who was in the right place." But as he looked at the bruise forming on her arm, the unmistakable imprint of a hand where Brad had grabbed her, his eyes darkened. "Who did this to you, Sam?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Who left you out there?" Samantha closed her eyes, clutching hope tighter. My husband. Brad Sterling. Colt Maverick memorized the name. Brad Sterling. He stared out at the snowstorm, and for the first time in years, the billionaire felt the urge to destroy something other than a competitor's stock price. Rest now, Colt said, turning back to the wheel and putting the truck in gear. I've got you. And I promise you, Brad Sterling is going to regret the day he was born. The sterile beep of the heart monitor was the first thing Samantha heard. She blinked open her eyes, disoriented by the harsh fluorescent lights of the recovery room at Bozeman Health Deaconess Hospital. Her entire body felt like one giant bruise, and her lower abdomen throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. You're awake, a soft voice said. She turned her head. Sitting in a plastic chair in the corner, looking comically large for the furniture, was Colt. He had showered and changed into a clean black t-shirt and jeans, but he still looked like a mountain of a man. In his arms, swaddled in a pink hospital blanket, was Hope. She's perfect, Colt said, his voice dropping to a whisper as he walked over to the bed. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. The doctors said it's a miracle she didn't get frostbite. You kept her warm enough inside you. Samantha reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched her daughter's cheek. The reality of what happened crashed down on her. Snow. The taillights. The betrayal. Does he know? Samantha asked, panic spiking in her chest. Did you call the police? Will they call Brad? Colt's expression hardened. He carefully placed Hope in the bassinet beside the bed and sat on the edge of the mattress. I spoke to the sheriff. I told him I found a Jane Doe on the highway. I didn't give them your name yet, Sam. I figured you might want to decide how this plays out. Samantha gripped the sheets. Brad is powerful. He has lawyers who cost more per hour than I used to make in a month. If he finds out I'm alive, if he finds out about Hope, he'll spin it. He'll say I was crazy, that I ran away. He'll take her from me just to punish me. Tears streamed down her face. He told me to get out of the car. He left us to die. If I go back, I'm dead anyway. Colt listened, his jaw working as he ground his teeth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black leather wallet. He wasn't just a driver, he was a man who understood leverage. Then don't go back. Colt said simply. It's not that easy. I have no money. He took my purse. I have no ID, no credit cards. Samantha. Colt interrupted, his blue eyes locking onto hers. In the eyes of the state of Montana, you are currently a woman without a past. I can help you keep it that way. I have resources. He didn't explain that he owned the trucking company or that he had a net worth that rivaled the GDP of a small country. He didn't explain that he had a team of private security consultants who could scrub a digital footprint in under an hour. To her, he was just the kindest man she had ever met, a trucker who had saved her life. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" Colt looked at the sleeping baby. "Because my mother was left in the snow once," he said, his voice rough with an old pain. A different kind of snow, a different kind of man. But no one stopped for her. "I'm stopping for you." Over the next 3 days, Colt made things happen with a terrifying efficiency. He paid the hospital bill in cash, $15,000 pulled from a safe in his truck, so there would be no insurance trail. He drove her to a small rental property on the outskirts of Livingston, a quiet town nestled between the mountains. It was a modest 2-bedroom cabin with a view of the Yellowstone River. "I paid the rent for 6 months, Colt said, handing her a set of keys and a burner phone. "There's cash in the envelope on the counter. It's enough for groceries and diapers." "I can't accept this," Samantha sobbed, standing on the porch of her new sanctuary. "I can never repay you." "You pay me back by raising that little girl to be strong," Colt said. He tipped his baseball cap. "I'm on a route through here every Tuesday. I'll check on you. If you need anything at all, you call the number in that phone. It goes straight to my personal line." "What do I call myself?" she asked. "I can't be Samantha Sterling anymore." Colt looked at the river, rushing and unstoppable. "Hart," he said. "Sam Hart. Because you've got a big one." The ghost of Samantha Sterling died on the highway. Sam Hart was just beginning to live. 5 years later. The bell above the door of the Rusty Spoon Diner jingled, signaling the morning rush. The diner smelled of bacon grease, strong coffee, and lemon floor wax. It was a local haunt in Livingston, the kind of place where the menu hadn't changed since 1985, and the regulars had their own designated stools. "Order up," the cook, a grumpy man named Earl, shouted from the pass-through window. Sam Hart wiped her hands on her apron and grabbed the plates. "Coming, Earl. Keep your shirt on." At 28, Sam looked different. The soft, fearful girl from the Mercedes was gone. In her place was a woman with defined muscles in her arms from carrying heavy trays, and a resilience in her eyes that commanded respect. Her hair was cut shorter, a practical bob that framed her face. She expertly balanced 3 plates of pancakes and walked to booth 4. "Here you go, Sheriff," she smiled, sliding a plate down to the man in the uniform. "Thanks, Sam. You hear the news?" Sheriff Reynolds asked, pouring syrup. "Big city developers sniffing around town. Rumor is they want to buy up the whole block, including this place. Build some high-end ski lodge overflow." Sam felt a cold knot in her stomach. "Earl won't sell. He loves this place." "Everyone has a price, Sam," the sheriff shrugged. Sam walked back to the counter, her heart beating a little faster. She and Hope lived in the apartment above the diner now. It was small, but it was home. Hope was 5 years old, a bright, bubbly girl with curly hair and a laugh that could illuminate a cave. Speaking of hope, the back door of the kitchen swung open, and a little girl in a pink parka ran in, followed by a giant of a man shaking snow off his boots. "Uncle Colt," Hope squealed, holding up a plastic toy truck. "Look, he got me the hauler." Sam's face lit up. It was Tuesday. Colt Maverick walked in, filling the diner with his presence. He had grayed slightly at the temples over the last 5 years, but he looked just as formidable. He wore his usual flannel and jeans, the uniform of a working man. No one in the diner, not even Sam, knew that Maverick Logistics had just acquired a shipping fleet in the Pacific, immediately adding $2 billion to his net worth. "Hey, Sam," Colt smiled, the expression softening his rugged face. "Coffee. Black." "You know it," she said, pouring him a mug before he even sat down. Colt lifted Hope onto the stool next to him. "How is she? School going okay?" "She's reading at a second-grade level," Sam said proudly. "But she needs braces soon. I'm picking up extra shifts to save up." Colt frowned. He wanted to write her a check right there. He wanted to buy the dental practice and gift it to her. But he knew Sam. She was proud. She had refused every dime he offered after that first 6 months. She wanted to stand on her own 2 feet. He respected that, even if it killed him to watch her struggle. "I can help Sam," he said quietly. "No, Colt. We're fine. You do enough bringing her toys and fixing my sink," she whispered, leaning over the counter. "You're the only family we have. That's worth more than money." Colt took a sip of coffee to hide the emotion in his eyes. For 5 years, he had been in love with her. It was a slow-burning thing, built on respect and shared trauma. But he felt he couldn't cross that line. He was her savior. He didn't want to be her predator. And he was terrified that if she knew who he really was, that he was a billionaire who moved in the same circles as the man who tried to kill her, she would feel betrayed. "So," Colt said, changing the subject. "Sheriff mentioned developers." "Yeah," Sam sighed. "Some firm from Seattle. Sterling Architectures or something. They're buying up the waterfront." Colt froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He hadn't heard that name in years. Brad Sterling. He set the cup down slowly. "Sterling Architectures. Yeah, apparently the CEO is coming to town personally to seal the deal with the mayor today. Big shot type. I hope he doesn't come in here. I hate those suits." Sam didn't see the look on Colt's face. It was the look of a wolf that had just caught the scent of blood. "Sam," Colt said, his voice dangerously low. "Take the rest of the day off. Go upstairs with Hope." "What? Why? I have the lunch rush." "Just do it. Please." Colt, you're acting weird. I can't leave Earl hanging. Before Colt could argue, the front door opened. The jingling bell didn't sound cheerful this time. It sounded like a funeral toll. A gust of cold wind blew in, followed by 3 men in Italian suits that cost more than the diner's annual revenue. In the center, flanked by 2 assistants, was Brad Sterling. He looked older. His face was puffier, his eyes harder. He was typing on a smartphone, not even looking up as he walked to the center of the room. "This is it," Brad said, his voice carrying that familiar, arrogant sneer. "This is the historic landmark holding up my demolition permit. It smells like grease and failure." Sam dropped the coffee pot. It shattered on the floor, glass and hot liquid exploding everywhere. The sound made Brad look up. He froze. The diner went silent. The air tension was thick enough to choke on. Brad stared at the woman behind the counter. He took off his sunglasses, his hands shaking slightly. "Samantha," he whispered. Time seemed to warp. For Sam, the last 5 years evaporated, and she was back on the side of the highway, freezing, begging for her life. The terror was primal. She instinctively stepped back, putting her body between Brad and the stool where Hope sat eating a pancake. Brad took a step forward, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "It's not possible. You're dead." "I'm not," Sam said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "No thanks to you." Brad's assistants looked between them, confused. "Mr. Sterling, do you know this employee?" one asked. Brad ignored him. His shock was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating fury. If she was alive, his current marriage to Felicity Vance, which was based on a prenup stating he was a widower, was void. If she was alive, his image as the tragic, grieving architect was a lie. If she was alive, she was a liability. Then his eyes shifted. He saw the little girl with the curly hair peeking out from behind Sam's legs. Hope looked exactly like Brad's mother. The resemblance was undeniable. "Is that?" Brad pointed a manicured finger. "Is that my child?" "She's my daughter." Sam hissed. "You have no children. You left your child to die in a snowbank." "I have a daughter," Brad said, a twisted smile forming. "A daughter means an heir. A daughter means the public will love me." The prodigal father reunited. He took another step, entering the service area. "You stole her from me, Samantha. You ran away, you threw me out," Sam screamed, the trauma finally finding its voice. "You threw me out of the car in a blizzard. Who's going to believe that?" Brad laughed, looking around the diner at the blue-collar workers. "Look at you. You're a waitress in a dump. I'm a billionaire architect. I'll tell the courts you were mentally unstable, that you kidnapped her. I'll have custody by the end of the week." He reached out to grab Sam's arm, the same way he had 5 years ago. "Don't touch her," a deep voice rumbled from the counter. Brad stopped. He looked down at the man sitting on the stool. He saw the flannel shirt, the work boots, the grease on the jeans. He sneered. "Excuse me," Brad said, brushing invisible dust off his lapel. "Stay out of this, lumberjack. This is a family matter." Colt stood up. When Colt sat, he was big. When he stood, he was a monolith. He towered over Brad by 4 inches. He stepped in front of Sam and Hope, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "I said," Colt repeated, his voice vibrating with restrained violence, "don't touch her." Brad laughed, looking at his assistants. "Is this your boyfriend, Samantha? Some local trash you picked up? God, you really have low standards." Brad poked Colt in the chest with his finger. "Move aside, pal, or I'll buy this building just to fire you." Colt didn't flinch. He looked at the finger on his chest, then up at Brad's eyes. "You think money is power, Brad?" Colt asked calmly. It wasn't the burner he gave Sam. It was a satellite phone, sleek and industrial. "That's cute. What are you doing?" Brad demanded. "Making a withdrawal," Colt said. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. "Yes, Mr. Maverick." A crisp British voice answered instantly. "Jenkins," Colt said, his eyes never leaving Brad's. "Who is the primary lender for Sterling Architecture's current liquidity loan for the Montana project?" "One moment, sir." "That would be First National, which is a subsidiary of Maverick Holdings." Brad's face went pale. He knew the name Maverick. Everyone in business knew the name Maverick. It was the invisible empire that moved the world's goods. "Good," Colt said. "Call the CEO of First National. Tell him to call the loan. Immediately. Full repayment due in 24 hours. Understood, sir. Initiating now." Colt hung up. The silence in the diner was absolute. Brad stared at the trucker. "You're bluffing. You're just a driver. I saw your truck outside." "I am a driver," Colt said, stepping closer, forcing Brad to step back. "From now, I own your debt." Colt leaned down, his face inches from Brad's terrified face. "You left my wife and daughter in the snow, Brad. Now I'm going to leave you in the cold." Sam gasped behind him. "Wife." Brad stumbled back, tripping over his own expensive shoes. His phone started ringing. Then his assistant's phone rang. It was the bank. "This isn't over." Brad shrieked, his composure shattering. "You can't do this. I'm Brad Sterling." "Get out," Colt roared, a sound that shook the windows. Brad scrambled for the door, his assistants fleeing before him. They ran into the snow, the bell jingling frantically behind them. Colt stood there, his chest heaving. He turned slowly to face Sam. Sam was staring at him, her eyes wide, processing the impossible. "Maverick," she whispered. "You're Colt Maverick." Colt looked at her, the mask finally off. He looked vulnerable for the first time. Sam, I can explain. I wanted you to know me, not the money. I wanted to be sure. You said wife, she said, tears welling up again. Colt took a step toward her, his hands open. I've thought of you that way for a long time, Sam. I didn't want to overstep. I didn't want to buy your affection. But I will spend every penny I have to protect you from him. Hope tugged on Colt's jeans. Uncle Colt, is the bad man gone? Colt picked her up, hugging her tight. Yeah, sweetie. The bad man is gone. And he's never coming back. But Brad Sterling wasn't the type to go quietly. As his empire crumbled over the next few hours, sitting in his luxury SUV, he realized he had one card left to play. Violence. If he couldn't have his life back, he would make sure no one else lived happily ever after. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a snub-nosed revolver. The storm was coming back. The snow began to fall again as night descended over Livingston, thick, heavy flakes that seemed determined to bury the sins of the world. In the rental cabin by the river, Sam moved through the rooms, locking windows and drawing blinds. Her hands were shaking. The encounter at the diner had rattled her to her core, but the revelation about Colt, about Maverick, had left her feeling unmoored. The man who had fixed her leaky faucet and played tea party with Hope owned the very ground they walked on. Mommy, is the bad man coming back? Sam forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. She walked into the bedroom and tucked the duvet tighter around her daughter. No, baby. Uncle Colt made him go away. You're safe. I promise. She kissed Hope's forehead and left the door cracked open. She went to the living room, sitting in the darkness, watching the driveway. Colt had insisted on staying, but she had sent him away. She needed to think. She needed space to process the lie that had been their friendship. He had left a security detail at the end of the long driveway, 2 ex-military guards in an SUV. But Sam didn't know that Brad Sterling was desperate. And a desperate man is a resourceful one. Brad hadn't driven out of town. He had parked his SUV 3 miles down the river and walked through the frozen woods, bypassing the main road and the security detail entirely. The cold bit at his face, but he didn't feel it. The rage kept him warm. His phone was blowing up with notifications, assets frozen, credit cards declined, board members calling for his resignation. In 4 hours, Colt Maverick had dismantled a life Brad had spent 20 years building. Brad reached the edge of the clearing. He saw the warm, yellow light of the cabin. He saw the shadow of Sam moving inside. You took it all, he muttered, his breath misting in the air. You owe me. He crept toward the back of the house, where the kitchen door faced the river. He tested the handle. Locked. He looked around and found a heavy piece of firewood. Wrapping his suit jacket around his hand, he smashed the small pane of glass near the lock. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence of the night. Inside, Sam froze. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the drying rack, the heaviest thing she could find. "Colt," she whispered, hoping he had come back against her wishes. The back door creaked open. The wind howled into the kitchen, carrying snow and the scent of expensive cologne mixed with sweat. Brad stepped into the light. He looked deranged. His suit was torn, his hair wild, his eyes bloodshot. In his hand, the snub-nosed revolver shook violently. "Hello, darling," Brad rasped. "Get out," Sam said, her voice surprisingly steady. She raised the skillet. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Brad." "You should be," he sneered, raising the gun. "You ruined me. I was the golden boy. I was the visionary. And now I'm nothing because of you and your trucker boyfriend." "You did this to yourself," Sam screamed. "You left us to die. You chose money over your own child." "And I'd choose it again," Brad roared. "Where is she? Where is the brat? Don't you dare go near her." Brad lunged. Sam swung the skillet with all her might. It connected with his shoulder with a sickening crunch, sending him stumbling back into the counter. He howled in pain, the gun clattering across the floor. But Brad was fueled by adrenaline. He tackled Sam, driving her into the refrigerator. Her head cracked against the metal, stars bursting in her vision. He rapped, his hands around her throat, squeezing. "Die," he hissed, spittle flying onto her face. "Just die already." Sam clawed at his face, her nails digging into his skin, but his grip was iron. Black spots danced in her eyes. The sound of the wind faded, replaced by the rushing of blood in her ears. Suddenly, a small figure appeared in the doorway. "Leave my mommy alone." Brad looked up. Hope was standing there, holding a can of bear mace, something Colt had insisted they keep in every room. "Hope, run," Sam croaked. Brad laughed, a terrible wet sound. He let go of Sam and turned toward the child. "Well, hello there. Daddy's here." He took a step toward the girl. That was his mistake. He turned his back on a mother. Sam didn't just recover, she exploded. She grabbed a steak knife from the counter block. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She drove the blade downward into Brad's thigh. Brad screamed, a sound that tore through the night. He collapsed, clutching his leg. At the same moment, the front door exploded inward. Wood splinters flew across the room as a massive boot kicked the deadbolt frame right out of the wall. Colt Maverick stood there. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like the angel of death. He saw Brad on the floor. He saw Sam gasping for air. He saw Hope trembling with the bear mace. Colt crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't say a word. He grabbed Brad by the collar of his ruined suit and lifted him off the ground as if he were a rag doll. Brad flailed, but Colt slammed him against the wall, his forearm pressing against Brad's windpipe. "I should kill you," Colt whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying calm. "I should snap your neck right here." Brad gasped, his face turning purple. "I do. Oh, it. Oh, it." "No, Colt," Sam cried, staggering to her feet. "Don't. He's not worth it. Don't go to prison for him. Look at me. We're safe." Colt looked at Sam. He saw the bruises forming on her neck. The rage in his eyes warred with the love he held for her. Slowly, agonizingly, he loosened his grip. He threw Brad to the floor. Brad curled into a ball, sobbing, defeated. Colt turned to the doorway where his security team was finally rushing in, guns drawn. "Get this trash out of here," Colt commanded. "Call the sheriff. And tell him if he releases him on bail, I'll buy the police department and fire everyone." As the guards dragged a weeping Brad Sterling out into the snow, Colt dropped to his knees. He opened his arms, and Sam and Hope fell into them. "I'm sorry," Colt wept, burying his face in Sam's hair. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't faster." "You were right on time," Sam whispered, holding him tight. 1 year later. The air in the King County Superior Court was heavy, thick with the scent of floor wax and nervous sweat. It was the trial of the decade, a scandal that had gripped the Pacific Northwest and bled into national headlines, the Billionaire abandonment case. Samantha sat in the front row, her posture rigid, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She wore a tailored cream suit that made her look not like a victim, but like a statue of marble, beautiful, cold, and unbreakable. Beside her sat Colt. He wore a charcoal suit that struggled to contain his broad shoulders, his presence radiating a silent, protective menace that kept the paparazzi at bay. On the defense table, Brad Sterling looked like a man whose soul had been slowly siphoned away. The years spent in holding had stripped him of his golden tan and his manicured perfection. His suit hung loosely on his frame, his hair was thinning, and his eyes darted around the room with the desperate energy of a trapped animal. He kept glancing at his high-priced defense attorney, a man named Sterling had paid a fortune to hire, expecting a miracle. But there were no miracles left for Brad Sterling. The trial had been grueling. The defense had tried everything. They had tried to paint Samantha as hormonally unstable, a woman who had wandered off in a fit of hysteria. They tried to claim Brad had gone for help. But the evidence was insurmountable. The meteorological data of the blizzard, the hospital records of Samantha's near-death condition, and the damning testimony of the trucker who found her, Colt Maverick, had painted a picture of calculated cruelty that no amount of legal spin could hide. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Holloway asked, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the packed gallery. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman announced, standing up. He refused to look at Brad. Brad gripped the table, his knuckles white. "I am Brad Sterling," he thought, a mantra he had repeated his whole life. "I win. I always win." On the count of attempted murder in the first degree, the foreman read, his voice steady, we find the defendant, Bradley Sterling. Guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a sudden, sharp silence. Brad flinched as if he had been slapped. Guilty. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot, sealing the coffin on Brad's life. Judge Holloway peered over her glasses at the disgraced architect. Mr. Sterling, you treated your wife and unborn child not as human beings, but as inconveniences to be discarded. Your arrogance is only matched by your cruelty. I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty allowed by law. 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. 30 years. Brad slumped back into his chair, the air leaving his lungs in a rush. He looked back at the gallery, locking eyes with Samantha. He expected to see triumph or perhaps anger. But he saw nothing. She looked at him with a profound indifference. To her, he was no longer a monster. He was just a memory fading fast. As the bailiffs moved to handcuff him, Brad began to weep, ugly, heaving sobs that echoed in the silent room. It wasn't remorse. It was the terrified realization that his money had finally failed him. The steps of justice. The scene outside the courthouse was a chaotic sea of flashbulbs and microphones. As Sam and Colt emerged into the gray Seattle afternoon, the roar of the press was deafening. Mrs. Maverick, Mrs. Maverick, do you have a statement? Mr. Maverick, is it true you orchestrated the hostile takeover of Sterling Architectures just to dissolve it? Colt raised a hand, and the crowd, sensing the authority of a man who commanded fleets of trucks and billions of dollars, quieted down. He stepped up to the bank of microphones, adjusting the stand that was too short for him. I'll keep this brief, Colt rumbled, his voice deep and resonant. Today, justice was served. But justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. He looked down at Sam, a small smile playing on his lips. For the last 20 years, I have run Maverick Logistics from the shadows. I prioritized profit, efficiency, and expansion. But a year ago, I found something on the side of a frozen highway that changed my priorities. I found a family. A hush fell over the reporters. This was the reclusive billionaire opening a vein in public. Effective immediately, Colt announced, I am stepping down as CEO of Maverick Logistics. I will remain chairman of the board, but my days of running the day-to-day operations are over. I have a daughter to raise and a wife to spoil. The cameras clicked furiously. What about the Sterling assets? A reporter shouted. What happens to Brad's fortune? Sam stepped forward then. She placed her hand on the microphone, her engagement ring catching the light. Brad Sterling built his empire on ego, Sam said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the crowd. He believed that strength meant discarding anyone who needed help. We are going to prove him wrong. She took a breath, looking out at the city skyline. All liquidated assets from Sterling Architectures, along with a matching donation from my husband, will go toward establishing the Hope Foundation. We will be building a network of safe houses and legal aid centers for women and children escaping domestic abuse. We will ensure that no woman is ever left out in the cold. Again. The crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite applause of a gala. It was the raucous cheering of people who had just witnessed the good guys win. 6 months later, the warmth of home. The Montana winter had returned, but this year, the snow did not feel like a shroud. It felt like a blanket, tucking the world in for a long, peaceful sleep. The estate, a sprawling timber and stone lodge nestled in the foothills of the Absaroka Mountains, glowed with warmth. In the great room, a fire roared in the massive stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the high beams of the ceiling. The air smelled of pine needles, wood smoke, and the cinnamon of hot cocoa. Lucky, the golden retriever, was curled up on the rug, thumping his tail rhythmically as 6-year-old Hope brushed his fur. "Mom, look." Hope giggled. Lucky loves his Christmas bow. Sam laughed, walking into the room with a tray of cookies. "He looks very handsome, sweetie. Save a cookie for Santa, okay? And one for Uncle Colt." "Dad," a deep voice corrected gently from the doorway. "We talked about this, remember?" Hope's face lit up. "Dad." She ran across the room and launched herself at Colt. Colt caught her easily, swinging her up into the air. He was dressed in flannel and jeans, looking every bit the trucker he had pretended to be, but the tension that used to live in his jaw was gone. He looked younger, lighter. "All right, Munchkin." "Bedtime," Colt said, nuzzling the top of her curly head. "Santa can't come if you're awake." "Promise." "Cross my heart and hope to die." After a flurry of protests and kisses, Hope was tucked into her bed. Colt returned to the living room, where Sam was standing by the window, watching the snow fall on the frozen river. He walked up behind her, wrapping his massive arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. As she leaned into him, closing her eyes. "It's snowing hard," she whispered. "Let it snow," Colt murmured against her ear. "We have plenty of firewood. And I'm not going anywhere." He turned her around so she was facing him. The firelight reflected in his intense blue eyes. He looked at her with a reverence that still took her breath away. "You know," Colt said softly, "I used to hate the winter. After my mom died. The cold just reminded me of being alone. But now I look at this snow, and I just think of the day I found you. I thought I was going to die that day," Sam admitted, a shadow crossing her face. "I know," Colt said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "But you didn't. You survived. You fought. And because you fought, you saved me too. I was a rich man. With an empty life, Sam. I was just driving in circles, until I met you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sam's breath hitched. "A cold. We got married at the courthouse for the papers," Colt said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it to secure the adoption, to protect the assets. It was a business arrangement that grew into something else. But I never asked you. I never gave you the choice." He dropped to one knee on the plush rug. He opened the box. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a diamond unlike any other. It wasn't a standard cut. It was custom designed in the shape of a perfect, intricate snowflake. "Samantha Hart," Colt said, looking up at her. "You are the strongest, most incredible woman I have ever known. You turned a nightmare into a fairy tale. I love you more than I have words to say. Will you marry me? For real this time. Not for protection, not for the law, but just because you want to spend the rest of your life with a retired trucker." Tears streamed down Sam's face, hot and happy. She looked at the snowflake ring, a symbol of the cold that tried to kill her, now turned into something beautiful and permanent. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choking. "Yes, Colt. 1,000 times yes." Colt stood and slid the ring onto her finger. He kissed her, a deep, soul-sealing kiss that promised a lifetime of warmth. Outside, the wind howled through the Montana pines, carrying the snow across the vast, wild landscape. Hundreds of miles away, in a cold, gray cell, Brad Sterling stared at a concrete wall, shivering in the draft, left alone with the echoes of his own choices. But in the cabin by the river, the fire burned bright, and the family that fate had stitched together held each other tight. They had weathered the storm, and finally they were home. That brings us to the end of the incredible journey of Samantha and Colt. It serves as a powerful reminder that while the world can be cold and cruel, kindness and resilience will always find a way to triumph. Brad Sterling learned too late that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in the people who stand by you when the storm hits. Karma may have been slow, but it delivered justice in the end. What did you think of the snowflake engagement ring? Was it the perfect symbol? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us create more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching.